All right, hello everyone. My name is Thomas. Welcome to my channel. I do educational videos. We are right in the middle of doing um, a long unit on the reciprocal system of theory. And we're looking at, this is a theory derived by Dewey B. Larson. He died back in 1990. We're looking at his final book that actually came out after he died, called Beyond Space and Time. And Larson's reciprocal system is a theory of everything that he started working on as early as 1930. He came out with his fundamental postulates in the 1950s, which the first one is the main one, and that is that the universe itself is not made out of matter, it's not made out of energy, but it is made out of motion. And motion is the relationship between time and space. Time and space have a reciprocal relationship, and they, which means that they have the same basic qualities. Time is always progressing. It's always getting later and later and later. And therefore, so too is space. Space is always getting further and further and further apart. That is the flow of space. And that was detected back in the 20s by the Hubble telescope with the recession of the distant galaxies. All of the distant galaxies are moving away from each other. And space we know to be three-dimensional or multi-dimensional, 3 or 4-dimensional. And so too, therefore, is time. Also 3 or 4-dimensional. Larson calls this coordinate time to match with coordinate space. And on the other side, that was clock time and clock space. And so there is a coordinate time, 3 dimensions of time. Now those, the other thing about time and space is that they are both quantized. There is a minimum unit of time and a minimum unit of space. 1 unit of space in 1 unit of time, space over time, that's speed. Space over time, 1 unit of space over 1 unit of time is the speed of light. The speed of light is not the maximum speed of the universe, like Einstein says, but it is the midpoint or the neutral point or the null point of the universe, meaning that there is half of the universe that is moving faster than the speed of light. Larson calls this the sector 2, or the cosmic sector. And then the familiar half, which is the half that's moving slower than the speed of light. Larson calls this the material sector, or sector 1. This is the sector of the normal material atoms and molecules that we know of, which build up by aggregation until they get to their most complex level, which Larson says is DNA. DNA then, at its most complex level, becomes eligible to be taken control over by a sector 2 component, or a cosmic component. And when the two combine, that's what you get what Larson calls the life unit. The life unit is a combination of a material and cosmic entities. Then the life unit develops or evolves by its over a course of time to its most complex level. And at that point, it becomes eligible to be taken over or controlled by what Larson calls an entity from sector 3. Sector 3, otherwise known as God or the spiritual world, and that is independent of space and time, or beyond space and time. I would submit that that has to do with this light realm that is in between, the boundary in between space and time, in between the sector 1 and sector 2. So sector 1 has basically space over time relationships. Sector 2 has time over space relationships in general. And the border there is the speed of light. And we know about the material sector We don't know about the cosmic sector, but we can figure out the cosmic sector by extrapolation because these are both identical, other than they have the roles of space and time reversed. So you just have to reverse the roles of space and time. Over here, you have coordinate space and clock time. Over here, you have coordinate time and clock space. So you just have to invert, and so then you can figure out what's going on over here. Now, in his final book, he incorporates all of the metaphysical stuff, the Sector 3 stuff. So his final book, Beyond Space and Time, is really kind of a look at Sector 3 and how Sector 3 influences this whole universe. And a lot of that is communications from Sector 3, which we variously call ESP, intuition, scientific insight, and religious revelation. And also, when Sector 3 takes control of the intelligent human being, which is the most complex level of life, then the human being is kind of caught in the middle of two controls. Control by Sector 2, which is geared towards survival, and control by Sector 3, which is geared toward ethical behavior or good behavior. And so sometimes those two things work in harmony, but other times there's a conflict. And at that point, the human being has to decide which one of those controls they're going to follow. That is the realm of free will. And so we are in chapter 19 right now, which is called Good and Evil. And so right now he's dealing with the problem of evil in the world. And, how can Sector 3 be omnipotent and at the same time there contains evil? Okay, so we're going to just reiterate. I was kind of in the middle of a paragraph before. We're going to go back and start that paragraph over. From this, which is how man is subject to the physical limitations of matter and of biological structures, it follows that if we define evil in broad terms so that it includes physical items such as pain and suffering, then evil is a necessary and unavoidable accompaniment of human existence. On this basis, human and without evil are mutually exclusive. And in a rational existence, even omnipotence cannot accomplish the impossible. If we use the definition set forth in this work, which characterizes evil as evil only those instances in which a human individual deliberately chooses to follow his biological impulses rather than the code of ethical man, the existence of evil is likewise unavoidable under present conditions when mankind is still only a few steps removed from its animal origins. This fact is strongly emphasized in Buddhism, where it's called the First Noble Truth, which he describes here. What the Buddha is saying is that by virtue of being born into the realm of finite and changing existence in which events follow their own laws, no one escapes the conditions that bring pain. And therefore, the problem of unhappiness is the universal problem of life. Unhappiness, sometimes I've seen that as more like suffering. It should be understood that so far as this present analysis is concerned, the problem of evil is purely hypothetical, as there is no such problem unless the existence of an omnipotent power is assumed. Our findings to date do not go this far. They merely establish the reality of metaphysical existence and define a few of the properties of such existence. They do not reach any conclusion as to whether this existence or one of these existences is a deity, omnipotent or otherwise. The present discussion is also limited to the human aspects of the problem. Some of the broader questions that arise when the possibility of existence of a different type in some different kind of universe is taken into consideration will be discussed later. Identification of the items which are in harmony with the code of Sector 3 and therefore qualify as good, and those which are in conflict with that code and therefore must be classified as evil, is the first step in constructing a system of moral values consistent with existence as an ethical man rather than a highly advanced animal. Since man has the privilege of exercising a choice as to what actions he will take in any particular set of circumstances, he necessarily must have some basis on which he makes his moral choices. That basis is his system of moral values. It is likely that most individuals do not realize, or realize only dimly, that they do have value notions that govern their decisions with respect to moral issues. Indeed, there is one school of thought that contends that human beings are ruled only by impulse and instinct, and that the idea of the existence of moral values is nothing but a delusion. These so-called irrationalists argue that man's mind, like his body, is a product of evolution from his animal ancestry, and that his civilized characteristics are no more than a thin veneer over the animal impulses that exercise the real control over his actions. They cite as evidence the frequency with which latent savagery comes to the surface in times of crisis, even in the most advanced nations. In light of the information developed in the earlier pages, it is evident that this view of the situation is actually correct in application to those individuals who are completely or almost completely under the control of Sector 2, the biological sector. The moral code has no more meaning to such an individual than to a predatory animal. But none of the arguments put forth by the irrationalist school of thought is applicable to those human beings who are to any significant degree under the control of Sector 3. That is, are at least partially entitled to be classed as ethical men. To such a person, the moral code and the system of values based upon it have a very real meaning, and the extent to which that value system has been developed reflects the extent to which he has made the great transition from man, the animal, to man, the ethical individual. The statement that X has a positive moral value is equivalent to a statement that X is good. The term good is generally used without any quantitative significance, merely to distinguish an item which possesses this quality from one which is bad or evil. An ethical system that views all morality in absolutes, that asserts without qualification that A is right and B is wrong, has no need for the additional concept of value. But few of our present-day problems lend themselves to this simple treatment. The great majority of them have multiple facets. And in order to make the correct decision as to the morality of any proposed action in connection with such a problem, we must strike a balance, weighing the good that is involved in the action against the bad that goes along with it. For this, we need a quantitative term, and this we call value. Because of the subjective nature of value, it cannot be measured with the precision of a physical measurement, but rough approximations are sufficient for most purposes. Both good and evil can be related to the same scale. That is, that which is good has a positive moral value, that which is evil has a negative value. That which is neutral, without moral significance one way or another, has zero value. Recognition of this neutral category is essential for the proper assessment of moral values. The issue of morality arises only when there is a conflict between the rules of Sector 2 and those of Sector 3. Animals have no moral issues to contend with. Their actions are dictated entirely by biological considerations, the rules of Sector 2. The same biological considerations also apply to human life, and where the actions to which they lead do not violate the Sector 3 code, they have no moral implications one way or another. Values can be assigned in these areas too, but they are not moral values. Confusion between these different kinds of value is one of the major factors that has stood in the way of reaching any consensus on ethical principles. Philosophers have not usually recognized any distinction at all in this area. And then he quotes a couple of different philosophers. And then he says, a recent book by Ellen Loring with a significant title, Two Kinds of Value, is aimed specifically at this point. And Popper wrote the foreword to that book and says that the first central theme is that there exist non-ethical standards of value, or if you like, standards of non-ethical value, that these standards are in common use. But the rather general acceptance of the maximum happiness criterion of morality practically closes the door to any widespread recognition of distinctions of this kind. And the tendency at the moment is to stretch the concept of morality to the point of absurdity. Arguing against Kant's categorical imperative, there are courses of conduct which are certainly moral, even though they cannot be universalized. And to particularize, Hazlitt cites the fact that a man may decide to learn the violin without wishing that everybody should learn to play the violin. But playing the violin is not certainly moral. It is certainly not immoral, but neither is it moral. The error here is the assumption that an action must be either one or the other, an assumption that overlooks the fact that there is a category which is ethically neutral, a type of action which has no moral aspects at all. Benefit and harm are, in the first instance, non-ethical values, are disvalues. So basically, he's saying that there's three categories of value there. There's an entire neutral category that has to do maybe with happiness and maybe with some other things, but they don't have moral values connected with them. In another context, I think Larson refers to that more like making economic decisions. And when there is a moral value, you have a dichotomy. You have two choices. When there are economic decisions, you have multiple choices. Okay, I think you'll get to that eventually here. Because of the prevailing lack of distinction between ethical and non-ethical values, social, political, and economic issues of many kinds have been and are being confused with moral issues by both philosophers and religious authorities. The essence of good, asserts William James, is simply to satisfy demand. But his is not a definition of a moral good. There is no moral demand comparable to demand or desire for economic goods. Since ethical man wants to follow the moral code, he may experience some kind of a sensation that could be called a moral satisfaction when he is able to do so, but this has little resemblance to the satisfying of economic or social wants, and it is doubtful that the term satisfaction is appropriate in connection with moral choices. The good which fits James's definition is a non-moral good, especially an economic good. Each individual has a certain inherent capability of doing useful work. If he converts that potential into an actuality, the products thereof, or a portion of them, become available to him for use or exchange. Ultimately, he experiences a certain amount of satisfaction from the results of his efforts, but the entire transaction from start to finish has been economic. Whatever values have been placed on labor or its products during this activity have been economic values, not moral values. So really like sector 2, not sector 3. In the course of this process, the worker may have an opportunity to increase the economic values that accrue to him by making wise decisions as to the application of his labor and as to his expenditures in the marketplace. No moral question arises here under ordinary circumstances. Negative values are balanced against positive values in the usual way to arrive at conclusions, but only economic values enter into these judgments. The correct decision in each case is that which leads to the most desirable economic consequences. the largest net positive balance of values, but there is no moral obligation to make the correct economic decision unless the individual's situation is such that maximum economic returns are essential in order to supply him with the resources that are required for carrying out his moral obligations. The person may also encounter an opportunity to secure an additional economic values by dishonest means. And the important point that most philosophical value systems fail to recognize is that these economic values are not commensurable with the moral values that are involved. We cannot compare the two and strike a balance, as we do with positive and negative moral values, or positive and negative non-moral values. Unless a dishonest act has some positive moral value that outweighs the dishonesty, the act as a whole is a violation of the moral code, irrespective of the magnitude of the desirable economic or social consequences that may result. The religion-based moral codes recognize the difference between moral and non-moral values. But since they define morality as conformity with the will of God, this leaves it essentially undefined, and no one knows just what it is that God wills. In their efforts to find a more specific foundation for ethics, philosophers, with the notable exception of Kant, have generally lost sight of the distinction between moral and non-moral values. The resulting atmosphere of confusion and contradiction is the factor that has opened the door to such ideas as ethical relativism. Okay, we're going to stop right there and take over here tomorrow in this chapter 19, Good and Evil, Moral Values. Hopefully, thanks for tuning in. Hopefully you'll tune in tomorrow and catch the end of this. Have a great day. We'll see you soon.